The first African fashion billionaire they're not going to have the best designs, but they're going to have the best business model. If the West likes my products, they can come to. We're not going to go and chase fashion weeks around the world.
Matthew Rugamba is the founder and creative director of House of Tayo, a fashion house born in Rwanda and embraced on the global stage. But the journey didn't begin with runways or global recognition. It began with bow ties, crafted by hand, driven by passion, and rooted in curiosity. From those early pieces in Kigali, House of Tayo evolved into one of Rwanda's most influential fashion brands, earning international acclaim. More than a designer, Rugamba is a cultural architect who understands that fashion is both art and enterprise. His passion has matured from craft to strategy, mastering not only fabric and form, but the business fundamentals that sustain creativity.
When I started to realize how difficult it was, I knew I had to go all in.
Patience. Patience has been the hardest lesson.
Yeah.
Tell us more. Hello and welcome to Rooted in Quality by Afro Quality, the podcast that brings you all the people and the ideas and the movements that are shaping Africa's creative, cultural, and economic future. Today, we have a young man joining us who has a wonderful story that we believe can help to shape our thinking and understanding of a lot of the trends on the continent. My guest today is someone who embodies this vision. He is the founder and creative director of House of Tayo, a brand that comes out of Rwanda but has gained enough international acclaim to plant itself as one of the penultimate fashion brands and fashion houses in Rwanda. He is not just a designer, he is also a cultural architect. Matthew Rugamba, good afternoon and thanks for joining us on Rooted in Quality.
Good afternoon, thanks. Thank you for having me.
This is Rooted in Quality. Matthew, if someone you met the first time asked, who are you? Like, who are you really? What would be your answer?
I always struggle with that question because I feel that when I answer it, I tend to give a snapshot of where I am right now in this point in time. I believe human beings evolve and I feel that I've grown and I've changed. Right now, I'm a relatively new father. I'm a Hollywood, thank you. And a lot of my work, as a designer, as a creative director, I also look at the bigger picture now. I look at, I look at functional fashion. I look at, before maybe I just wanted to look really nice. Now, like, what would I wear as a dad? What would I wear if I was carrying 4 or 5 bags? So I think that my perception of myself continues to evolve, but I'm someone who always looks for authenticity, someone who enjoys storytelling, someone who wants to see Africa really continue to rise. I feel that this is an exciting time to be young and African on the continent, and I feel that it's an opportunity to not only create new narratives, but also to bring to the forefront narratives that existed before, but the world was not aware of. So I see a lot of responsibility. I see responsibility for myself as I've now become a senior fashion designer in Rwanda, in the industry. So I have to look at, what practices I'm taking on, what ways I'm doing business. It will impact whether a parent lets their kids go to fashion school. So I see a lot more responsibility in my personal life, in my work life. My team has grown over times, and I just want to do good work. I want to celebrate Rwanda and Africa. I want to to change the way we do business and make this industry grow. So yeah.
If you are to put a pin in the spectrum of your life, based on your question about how you answer the question about who you are. So if you were to put a pin to say, looking back, when you were just starting out as House of Tayo, if you were to answer that question, how different is that answer from the answer that you're giving now? In terms of when you strip off being a father, a creative designer, everything, in terms of the person.
So at that time, I would call myself an aspiring fashion designer that wants to have stores in New York, London, that wants to have runway shows in those countries. And the reality is that that dream of being a big fashion designer then, it was sort of co-opted from looking at the Western fashion industry and saying, this is the path of a successful fashion designer. But now, it's actually 14 years almost to the day. It was actually yesterday, 25th was our 14-year anniversary. That dream and those goals have evolved and changed. And so I had a vision, but part of it wasn't mine. Part of it was what I was sort of conditioned to believe is success. But at the baseline, my goal was to celebrate where I'm from. And fashion I found was a really rich way to tell stories about where you're from, to celebrate and things like dignity, lifestyle, and character, all these elements where I believe we can celebrate it through things like fashion, through cuisine, through the arts. And I found that fashion was the way that I was going to do that.
You said something about if a parent would think and make a decision whether they would have their child become a fashion designer, they would look at what you are doing, and if you are not living right, that's shaped a certain thought in my mind in terms of how you see yourself. Is it right to say you are very conscious in terms of outside of your fashion, what the brand or the person Matthew Rugamba represents in the community?
I think that because I know the obstacles I faced when I was starting out, and you do have people who are closest to you who worry that I don't know whether they can succeed in this industry, but it's because they don't have an example for you to follow.
Reference.
There's no reference. So one of the things that really motivated me in the early days, especially, and it still motivates me now, is I have to show the brand growing. I have to show elements of success, because there are people who have told me, even early on when I was really struggling, that because they saw what I did, they entered the industry, or because they saw what I did, they pursued another creative interest. So that's where I see the sort of responsibility is that I need to, for our industry to grow, for the creativity, for the arts, success is an important element, because maybe their parents, their uncles, their aunties, whoever, their mentors will say, oh, maybe pass by there, ask them at House of Tayo how they did it. We've been watching their story online for all these years. Look at how they did it. So it's possible. It's within reach. Everyone is inspired by someone else.
Congratulations again on your 14th anniversary. Do you consider it now, after doing it for 14 years, that this is your life's work?
Yes.
Or maybe to put the question differently, in another 14 years' time, would we find you still building House of Tayo?
The hope, right now, I'll say the hope is yes. But I also hope that it will have evolved.
Definitely.
Not just within fashion, maybe within other elements.
Okay.
It's become so tied to my identity. To be honest, I've not really existed in any other work space. So I've shaped my company the way I do admin based on my experience. I have not existed in another really, like whether it's a corporate setting or I did this straight when I was in school. I was in school, I started when I was in school, and so I hope that it will have evolved and taken even a different shape. I feel even just to make life interesting, people take on different roles. Maybe my role will have shifted within the company.
But still, your effort will be on growing the vision.
Yes, and I think that one of the key things that I look at is, if I was to strip everything away, what would House of Tayo look like as a content company? What would it look like as a restaurant? What would it look like as a sports team? And if I'm able to identify characteristics and elements that remain consistent in each of those settings, then the sky is the limit. And then I would truly believe that we have something strong.
You started out of school. At what point did you realize that this was going to be your life's work? Like, this is it.
When I was when the idea was coming to me, I don't think it was like a sudden epiphany. It was developed over time, and I remember looking around and saying, university is the only time I'll be surrounded by peers who are so experienced in so many different things, and so it was a great opportunity to start something. I didn't know what it was going to be, but it was a good opportunity to start something. And there were so many people I could ask for advice. My first photographers were my classmates, models were my classmates. People that did some of the editing, graphic work were my classmates. And I don't think I would have started anything outside of that context if I had entered the work space, work environment. When I started to realize how difficult it was, I knew I had to go all in. I knew that eventually I would have a family and maybe I wouldn't be able to take certain risks. And in order for people to believe in what I was trying to do or believe that it was possible, there was no halfway. Halfway wouldn't have got me here. I had to go all in, and if I failed, I failed. So I was still very young, to be honest. And it would have just been part of my journey.
You've just said something. You realized how difficult it is. And then you decided that because of that, you had to go all in, which usually you don't find a lot of young people look at the world that way. So that's why I had to take a pause and actually also think deeply about it. Most of the times you meet people and they try something, it's difficult, they just give up because they're just moving forward to the next thing. How did you come to that mindset 14 years ago?
I think that the challenge excited me, but also I didn't feel like, what was the cost of failure? At that point, it wasn't high. I knew it was only going to get higher. And I looked at alternatives of like, okay, if this doesn't work out, what am I going to do? And when I realized how much I enjoyed it, I said, no, I can't let myself fail at this point. I have to dig deep. I have to push myself. I have to be creative. And I have to if I couldn't do it alone. So for people to believe in me, they need to see, especially at that point when you couldn't even really guarantee any salaries, And I needed my team. Even now, I need my team to continue to trust in me. But that also comes from determination and a drive and a self-belief.
Now, touching on belief, but in the area of your work, there's a concept that I found whilst researching for this that's attributed or you've spoken about Afro-dandyism. And to be honest, until this year's Met Gala, where there was something around, I think Black dandyism or something was the theme, I had not even, I didn't know what that was. And so now looking at 14 years ago, you structuring your style around the concept of Afro-dandyism, what exactly was that and what does it mean to you versus what maybe the rest of the world might interpret the concept of Afro-dandyism?
So when I started House of Tayo, I was, to put it bluntly, I was frustrated. I was really frustrated and annoyed by the perception that many people had of Africa. And I felt it was one-dimensional. Even in situations where, many of my classmates at the time, I studied international relations, they're incredibly well-read. They stay on top of the news, but perceptions of Africa remained, rooted in, it's poverty, there's famine, there's disease, and they can't govern themselves, elements of that. And I thought to myself, if these are really educated people who are bombarded with this narrative of Africa, there's something I have to change. And I believed I could do that through the arts. Now, from that sort of frustration, I said, how can I present an alternative narrative? Or just another side, and I felt that the only way to sort of combat such negative stereotypes and stories is to have something uplifting that celebrates dignity, pride in one's heritage. And so I knew it had to be related to formal wear, but then what is formal wear? Where did suits come? The traditional suits came from England, and then the world co-opted that, and through colonialism it spread around the world. I wanted to say, but how did we start to make it our own? And so I started to do research about different subcultures around the continent, the way they dressed, and why did they dress a certain way at a particular time. And I was looking at all the independence movements, and those independence movements were sort of coupled with transition in fashion
And music.
and music, exactly. So I wanted to, the idea of dandyism in I guess in its earliest form was not, they didn't see it as coming from Africa. So I thought that phrase would perfectly describe the nuances and the differences of the way, in particular, African men dressed for occasion. And another element of it that sort of inspired me, I would always remember going to church at Easter, especially Easter, some Christmases, and Christmases I would be in the more rural area, and people don't earn that much, but they're going to church in well-tailored suits, polished shoes, the whole concept of
Put on their Sunday wear, Sunday best.
Yeah. Exactly. And I said, this shows the respect for an occasion, the respect for scenario, and that I only really saw it in Africa, where there's such high regard for a particular occasion, especially, and you're seeing it weekly for church.
Yeah.
and I wanted to sort of capture that where it's not about the money that's in your pocket. Obviously, the more money you have, maybe the more you can do, the more stylish you can be. But even with the minimum, it's a mentality, you know. So all those different influences sort of shaped my idea of Afro dandies, and I felt that as House of Tayo is introduced to the world, this is the lens I want to start with. Obviously, we would evolve to do many different things, but that was the lens that we had to start with, and that's the lens and that's sort of the concept that sort of propelled our work online the first time I posted.
You know, it's interesting what you say about the way Africans tend to think about occasions and prepare and plan for such. I had my own root shock, like at a point in my life when I had left Ghana, and then I went to church somewhere, and I was surprised about how the thinking and the mindset around going to church was versus how in Africa, and I want to believe it's the same in most places, where you'd want to put on your Sunday best for church, and that's like an occasion.
Yeah.
But in other places, there was nothing like that.
Exactly.
But you talked about it, and it just hit me that it's actually very real. I'm wondering how many other times or scenarios like that Africans tend to occasionalize it, but for most people, they take it in the stride like as a normal thing. That's very interesting. But you observed that. How old? Do you remember like how old you were around that time when you picked that nuance up?
It was, well, I was around 2021, between 20 and 22, really. But I think that it was in the back of my mind. But when I went to university in the States, is when it became a lot clearer. You know, I was talking to people who had never seen a tailor, and I was like, man, all my big events I had to go to a tailor.
Go to a tailor.
You know, and everyone in my family, all my friends, had access to a tailor. Like, it's
like having a barber. You might have a family tailor.
Yeah,
it's same as you're a family doctor here, you're a lawyer.
Exactly. So, and realizing that that's such a foreign concept for some people. And I remember for I think it was my confirmation, and for my confirmation, I had to go and I was like 8 or 9. I had to go and pick the fabric, and then take it to a tailor and sit, and watch clothes being made. And it was so long. I remember standing up and I could feel the bench for like the next 30 minutes. My bum and the bench had become one. You know, I didn't realize it took so long to make clothes. Yeah. But those experiences are foreign to many people around the world.
You're very big on stories, and you talk about the House of Tayo brand, using it to tell stories. What's one story that you've never told through House of Tayo, but you want to?
You know, I think a big part of stories for me is also about timing. And there's some things that I feel have not been fully formed to tell yet. And I think that there are many stories that I want to tell about the journey, about the challenges, about how every day you have to make difficult decisions, about creativity versus what makes business sense. A lot of the time they differ. So right now I don't feel like we've been doing as much storytelling as we did in our first 5 years.
Okay.
I think that my experience in the industry and now us as a company, we're sort of going through a period of evolution, and we will probably maybe get into the next phase next year,
Okay.
and then you will see more of that storytelling.
In building a creative business in Rwanda and thinking about how competitive the world of fashion is, like you think people talk about Milan, New York, Paris, or whatever. Did it ever cross your mind that people would underestimate what you are capable of just because you are coming from Rwanda and basing and operating from Rwanda? Because you went to school abroad.
Yes.
You could have decided to say, okay, this is what I want to do, but I want to do it in London, other place. So did you ever think that coming to do it in Rwanda would make people underestimate you?
I would say, funny enough, that more people underestimated me here than outside. Outside, it was an exciting story to tell, because firstly, fashion, the arts are always looking for something new. What's next? And so it was exciting for many people to hear about a company doing bow ties from Rwanda. There's like, first of all, people wear bow ties like that in Rwanda. Second of all, this is exciting. I want to know more. The fashion industry is always eager to know about what's
The next
the next new thing. Where you're likely to find opposition is when, certain access to certain things is a lot more gatekeeping. But to be honest, I never really reached that level. A lot of I found that the place we were underestimated was here. Where someone is like, I'm not going to pay this amount for your product,
because you look like me.
yes, or you made it here, and we basically had to prove ourselves every time a customer walked in. So you drove all the way to our store, walked around. There's something that brought you to the store, and yet you keep trying to downplay the work that
You are doing.
you wouldn't have come if there was nothing that attracted you to the store in the first place.
You see, two things have come up from what you just said. I think the first part, which maybe will also help with our listeners, is you talked about making bow ties out of Rwanda and how novel the concept sounded when you're out there in Europe and other places. And I realized that the story around how House of Tayo started, actually, we haven't touched on it. That you actually started off making bow ties before now you expanded into different categories, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just thought to put that out there so that it gives a lot more context to our listeners to be able to understand the journey and the trajectory of House of Tayo. But the second part of what you said about somebody who would come and they've heard nice things about the brand, everybody sees the quality work that you do, but still they would want to question whether you are worth that much. Do you think it's a factor of how we value ourselves, or people want to transpose the value that they do not have in themselves in using it to assess how you see yourself and how you price yourself?
I think that when those scenarios happen, obviously it frustrates me, but I also once I cool down, I have to think there's a reason why that happened. And from my understanding, is you have a whole machine around fashion from the West that is pumping out these stories and the placement in movies, in TV shows, and on our TVs. That's the only content we see. So I always say that by the time you purchase a product, you've been conditioned for a long time. And so we would just pop up on their Instagram page, and then they walk into the store. I said, we're not conditioning people to desire our product by doing that. So how I started getting people to wear my products with the bow ties in particular, I focused on something that existed in our society, weddings. So I made sure for the first couple of weddings, I'm telling all my friends, listen, I know you probably only have 1 or 2 suits maximum at this stage of your life. If you change the bow tie, if you wear a different shirt, you'll look like you have 6 or 7. And so I was giving out bow ties. So people go to weddings and like, I saw like 8 people with these bow ties. Let me go and look for them. So that was a part of us conditioning our audience to take a deeper look and consider our products. So whenever something, I think, when it fails, or when people walk in and they're questioning something too much, it's because we haven't set up the world for our product to exist.
We've not done the social marketing
Exactly.
to make our people view our products the same way they would view products from other parts of
Exactly.
the world. You know, I was telling somebody once that when we were talking about building Afro quality and how difficult it is and all that, and I said that one of the things that's come to me that if you take a brand like LVMH, they've done the hard work because there's a lot of work, years of consistent conditioning of the market to think the way they think about a Gucci or a Louis Vuitton. And as African brands, we have to understand that we can't take any shortcut. If we genuinely want to build the brands that would last, then you have to be ready to do the work and be prepared to say, you don't cut corners when it comes to how you shoot your videos. You don't cut corners in terms of how you represent the brand out there, because those are the little things that add up to create that mindset. But most of the times, African brands struggle with that kind of approach because you assume that because I'm from Africa, because I'm from Rwanda, and because I've done it, so give me the space and allow it to go, even when the consumer in their mind is like, he's evaluating you and comparing it to his experience that he just had when he entered the Louis Vuitton store.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a good point that you have made. And at the back of it is also to keep in mind that at that point in time, the responsibility is on you to say, you know the journey, you know what you're doing. You have to carry the customer along
Exactly.
that journey. You know, it's very insightful. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll shift gears a little bit in this conversation since we've gotten to talk a lot more about what does it say in terms of our retail systems. And I've touched on it, I think, in my last comment, that sometimes it becomes easier to be able to assess a brand that is next door, that is from Europe, or let me put it differently. Sometimes it's a lot easier. Let's say House of Tayo is doing very well in Rwanda, but somebody sitting in Zambia or Congo, which is like less than 2,000 or not even 2,000, maybe 500 kilometers or 800 kilometers away, the person will struggle to access your products, but then somebody sitting in London or New York will have easy access to want to buy a House of Tayo. What does it say about our retail systems on the continent? And for you, what has been your experience in terms of trying to build build House of Tayo and scaling it?
Oh, that's been a nightmare. I've always told people that people close to me that the first African fashion billionaire they're not going to have the best designs, but they're going to have the best business model, because that is such a major pain point. And so I've talked to many retailers over the years, and if I gather that they don't understand that issue and they don't have a plan on how they're going to tackle that, I say you're the same as me. Yeah. So I would rather just keep on retailing direct. I think that in terms of retail, there's so many elements to it. There's a logistics, there's payments, and a lot of those things are a lot bigger than us as individual brand. Every fashion designer that is able to sell international, they probably have their own combination of factors that they are using to make it work. And within Africa, it's just always felt like there's a lot of risk, and we already have tiny margin, so you don't want to add to that risk. It might be risk in terms of currency fluctuations. It's also about access. So like, you're looking at risk reward for everything. If I fly to London, the flight is probably cheaper than to many parts of Africa.
Probably will be cheaper than flying to, I don't know, Senegal.
Exactly.
Dakar is or Lagos.
Yeah. And there's no guarantee I'm going to make sales. But they go to Europe, London. So that has existed, but it's also, I don't believe it's entirely true. Now, when there's more information available, people will make different decisions. I have heard of brands that do pop-ups in Brazzaville, Juba, and whatever, and they're not interested about chasing money in America. So I think information will continue to change things. People building infrastructure will change things. Governments easing tariffs on certain certain goods will change things, but it's a process, and I think, and I'm sure many designers out there are a bit impatient like me. While other people are building these systems, I'm trying to find alternatives, shortcuts in the interim, because I'm not going to build a whole payment system yet. But don't be surprised if someone in retail ends up building a totally different solution, because that fixes those problems. Yeah.
I think the point that you've touched on business model is interesting to note, because it's one of the things that we tend to also fall in, especially as Africans, to not think about the business model in relation to what we are dealing with, but you think of it purely in terms of, okay, it's fashion business, this is how it's done in Italy.
Yeah.
So you assume that that's the playbook that's going to work, without taking into consideration the business side of things and how it will actually apply when you are trying to build something in that same industry, but in Africa or in a particular country. So it's interesting to hear that. But still, on the global fashion industry, when you go out there, do you think, or let me put it differently, what is the biggest misconception the global fashion industry has about African designers?
I remember I did an interview with Huffington Post in maybe 2014, and I basically said, stop calling African fashion tribal. And the comments, that was like the last time I looked at comments, people were angry about that. Really angry, because it was part of a long interview, but it became the headline.
Can you repeat that again so they come back and add comments to this interview?
I think now the world has evolved a lot more. But reading that interview, I mean, I was a bit nervous after that piece came out. But reading it again now, I'm really proud of what I said. Because I felt it was intellectually lazy. How can you have so many words to describe fashion from all over the world, but then for Africa it's like tribal black and white print, tribal blue and yellow dress, tribal, and at that time I was getting I was trying to explain to in that phase of my life, I was trying to explain to people that you're wearing a white shirt, there's no print whatsoever, but that is still African fashion. Mm-hmm. If clothes are made maybe just for particular body types that are predominant on the continent, that is African fashion. But at that time, especially, the view was African fashion needs print. African fashion means loud colors. African fashion cannot be subtle. It can't be, even elegant. And so I think I think it still exists, the misconception, the stereotype. You know, we've had people come to the store and like, you show them something and they really like a shirt and they're like, no, but I need something more African. You know, I need to show them that I got a shirt from Rwanda. And I was just like, there are different ways of doing this, you know? But it's an education. As I said, people are conditioned over time. So rather than simply getting frustrated by that, I have to see how do I also condition people to see things different. And conversations like this help that. Because I know that there's going to be some people who sit down and watch this who have never really thought about it. That they're seeing everywhere African fashion is described, they're seeing tribal. They didn't realize, you know, and so when I do realize certain things and I take time to think about it and take time to test and see, I make it my responsibility to talk about it.
No, but I think it's important to actually talk about it, talk about it a lot more, because in our experience with Afro Quality, like in the initial stages when we started our pilots, we'll bring products, and sometimes I remember one time when we opened the store in Accra, we had some Vivo products, and then a lady looks at you like, "Are you sure this is made in Africa?"
Yeah.
Because, like, and then she's looking at it like she's expecting to again see the stereotypical, okay, tribal signs, or it has to have a bit of chitenge in here before. But we said, look, Africa is huge, Africa is enormous, and the tastes are varied. You don't always want to wear chitenge. You know, it's so I think it's good, but what I'm taking out of it is that the conditioning has been so long. We have to stay at it long enough to also recondition our own people first, to also be able to pivot from it, so that if you have a relative or somebody you want to come from wherever in the world to come home to buy stuff, you should be comfortable to say, yes, you can buy things, you can buy the wax prints and everything, but you should be able to buy a running shoe.
Yes.
And say it's an African brand.
Yes.
And it's African fashion. You buy a normal shoe. It doesn't have to be a shoe that has some chitenge somewhere inside, so that's the only way you can be proud of something that is made from the continent. You buy a watch from the continent, believing that, yes, it looks as good as a Gucci watch or as some other brand, but it's an African brand.
Exactly.
You know, it's a mindset shift.
Yes.
That will help. We talked about the business model earlier on, and most of our fashion houses and fashion businesses tend to be very artisanal and small scale at best, medium scale. Scaling handcrafted production, of course, is very difficult. Should I say notoriously difficult? What keeps you awake at night, balancing the craft and knowing what's possible for you as House of Tayo?
I think that's the phase that I spend a lot of time dealing with that right now. Often we have to block off custom orders for a couple of weeks at a time to be able to work on new pieces, new stock. And we will make them knowing that people are not going to purchase them immediately. We're going to have to get them into the store, try them on, see a new style, and then sometimes we have to discontinue popular styles. So it's like saying, I'm not going to make money, but we have to do it so that people can try new things. And so we can introduce new things into the market. Now, it always feels like a chicken and the egg thing, where to increase our production, we have to know where we're going to sell. And to increase our production, we have to have new suppliers that can supply us in large quantities. And at the same time, we have to, as we try to transition to do bigger quantities, people need to walk into our store and be able to say, oh, can I order this shirt, but can I have this detail here? So we're sort of in that transition, but for us to continue to grow and for us to make money, we have to do more mass production. The hope is that we find experienced production partners who can assist us with this transition, because it's a whole different ballgame. It's not as easy as adding 10 more tailors, 15 more tailors. There are systems, there's new technology that's coming out frequently, and there's a lot of training that's involved. Yeah.
So, from what you're saying, because it brings me to mind the idea of having a system to scale up production beyond it being handcrafted, but to be able to still maintain that level of detail and authenticity to it. And so it comes to basically like production, having bigger production scale. Now, how do you juxtapose that with the trend that is happening in the world today, where there's a lot of conversations around slow fashion, because the industrialization of fashion has become so huge and there's so much waste, and there's that seeming push for Africa to go the slow fashion route. What's your view on that?
I think that I have a couple of views on that. I think that when you do talk about slow fashion, it's an important element of it is the business model as well. So and the supply chain. So slow fashion might not be in the actual making, but maybe the textile takes months to put together.
To get one, yeah.
Yeah. But then, if as a brand you've made the decision to go down that path, you have to be so strict about the storytelling. You have to be so strict about communicating why that is valuable. And I think that sometimes it's a responsibility that people overlook, and why maybe some of these slow fashion brands, start strong and fizzle out. So it's a complex thing, and I think that it's something that I continue to develop my views, and I expose myself to so many different production spaces, cultures. I look at India a lot. They have so many elements of slow fashion, whether it's beadwork, hand embroidery. But what I love to see, especially when I've looked at artisans in India, is that beadwork embroidery becomes it's almost like an applique, becomes part of a garment that is made maybe a bit faster. So that
It's like a bit of a merger between the fast fashion infrastructure with that slow fashion artisanal stuff.
exactly, and I think that that's one country that I've been looking at quite a bit. I look at, okay, what artisanal work is going on, and how have they, first of all, how do they keep it alive? How do they keep these skills within their?
How do they make the business also make sense?
Exactly. So maybe it will mean that we are part of something else, or we're creating a piece that is part of a bigger puzzle. In terms of, if you're looking at sustainability, maybe if you have a shirt and the textile takes, I don't know, maybe 3 months to weave, maybe it makes more sense to sell rugs. So I still think that without having clarity on the business model or different things you can do to keep the business running, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Talking about the challenges of the business model, what for you is the hardest business lesson you've learned in the last decade building House of Tayo?
It's been patience.
Patience has been the hardest lesson.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Patience in everything. When I have an idea, and then I'm like, okay, I want to implement this, and then so many of my raw materials were not available in Kigali, so I have a concept. Then I'm like, okay, if I can't find this sort of buckle, can I have it made? Then I now have to go and sit with someone who deals with metals for a whole 2 weeks to get one component for something that I had an idea about. And then if I want a new textile, I talk to manufacturers and okay, you need to do you need a minimum quantity of let's say 100 meters, and it's going to take 3 months to fulfill your order. So you get excited by the potential. You get excited by the idea. Then realize you have to wait 4 to 5 months to do the sample. So patience was difficult for me, and so I always feel like I have 20 tabs open, and I start one, let that process burn, then I go to the next one. So patience has been in all aspects of the business, whether it's at the store implementation of certain ideas, concepts, training. Now I have to have the foresight that if I want a tailor to be doing something really well, I have to look at my needs in 2 years and say, let me bring in a tailor now who will probably start on the ironing, and then every couple of weeks you give him time on the machine. Then he eventually becomes a tailor with me, but in so many aspects of the business, I can't go out and get the finished product of a component that I need to fulfill what the end goal is. So I've had to learn to be patient.
Patience. And I don't know, I think the African fashion industry has been patient enough. But if you look at what's happening now, there seems to be a lot of, I wouldn't say obsession, but a lot of excitement and interest in African fashion. Do you think, or do you see it as a trend? Or do you think that it's moving and helping to create a proper industry so we can actually talk about African fashion as a business and as an industry, outside of it being like a artisanal holiday, something that you buy to just show off to your friends?
I think that I think that the interest has sort of been building, but I do feel like there are elements of, I guess, a trend. Like when you're looking at the proliferation of African arts and fashion and music, cuisine into the global stage, I think the first versions of it were taken by the diaspora, and I think I would credit Nigerian diaspora for taking so much from the continent into the most remote parts of the world.
Please don't add the Ghanaians as well.
No, definitely Ghanaian. But I feel like so many African. But I remember the first time I heard Afrobeats in London. I was just like, whoa, these people play these songs here.
Traveling.
Yeah, this was sort of when House of Tayo was emerging. So that's part of the reason I feel that people adopt this. No, but people started to adopt.
Okay.
And pick interest in our brand because they started to hear African music in clubs. Restaurants started, they started seeing more African restaurants. They started to see more Africans on their screens, and then naturally people are looking for fashion. So timing was a big part of my journey and my story. And but in order for us to push past just like trends or flavor of the month, that type of vibe, we have to actually build industry. We have to build ecosystems. We have to strengthen institutions because if you have a handful of African brands becoming really strong over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to have the money coming from the West, from America, from Europe, and they're like, I can purchase an African brand for $2 million, $3 million, whereas the a brand of equivalent status in an Italy or Paris or wherever, they're going to spend
more.
tens or maybe even hundreds of millions. So it's very important for us to build ecosystem. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about from the textile to the actual workmanship, the whole supply chain, retail footprint, all those things. So that by the time, I guess, people start trying to inject money or purchase brands or equity, we've created brands of substantial value.
Which are well integrated.
Exactly.
Wow. So, from everything that you're saying, I can see clearly the impacts of other variables that tend to cross over and more or less seem to push or create traction for certain industries. And for the fashion industry, it's quite clear that there was a little bit of a push that it received from the music industry, which sort of made people want to assert themselves. But today, when I look at how big Afrobeats has become, I question myself, beyond the music, have we built enough commercial assets as a continent to be able to benefit or to leverage off the music and the equity of the music? From where you stand, what's assessment?
I don't think we've done enough, but I think that not enough people saw the music as an opportunity, as their gateway. But one of my favorite documentaries is The Tanning of America, and it talks about how hip hop put Obama into the White House. So it says, we're going to take you from 15 Cedric Avenue, where we're known as the birthplace of hip hop in New York, to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. Now, what I loved about it was like a VH1, maybe 4 or 5 part documentary, is they start from the first Jamaican DJs that went to New York, started scratching and doing all these things, and they keep showing at every stage how hip hop got into the mainstream. And in the 90s, you had so many different ads had people rapping, whether it's cereal, whether it's a restaurant, it's so many different things. But the fact that the ad has rapping in it shows how hip hop was sort of making its way through the American culture. And eventually, you had hip hop culture, which, Obama, at some point leading up to it, he embraced it. He was, braggadocious, good with words. He dropped a few lines from hip hop songs during his campaign. And when I watched that documentary, and I watched versions of it religiously. So whenever I look at Afrobeats, I look at hip hop. How did hip hop become mainstream? Because it was a small subculture.
It was a fringe subculture,
Exactly.
underground music.
Exactly, but and when it became mainstream, it had its own language, it had its own dress code, and the moment I started to hear, because I'll never, I remember the early days you listen to, I always start with like Two Face, D'banj, P Squared, huge. But then when I was starting House of Thai, it was more the video in his early days, and I was like, this is the time, because the more that we hear their music, firstly on radio, and how many people have requested for it to drop on radio.
Come.
Then you go out and they're not saving it for the first 2 hours of the night. They're playing the songs that peak out. And I remember the times I would be standing in a club and I'm just like, wait, is that whiskey? Did I hear? Is that whiskey? And then you're looking at people. You'd always see the Africans get excited and they're jamming, Caribbeans as well. And then you start seeing Europeans, Americans, Caucasian Americans, and you're like, you know what? the next things they're going to look for
Beyond the music is
is
the culture, the fashion.
the culture, the fashion, and so it's a gateway.
So I think from what you've said, and I have my own experience as well, like I see clearly that that represents an opportunity. I'm not so sure if the conversations have been had enough for us to begin to look at the business aspect of it, to be able to bring the culture as a property full circle, so that the music is there. The movies was a bit of a Nollywood came through, was Gollywood, a few movies here and there, and then things seem to have slowed down. But then the fashion space is a place that I think can also be really pushed. In my mind, it would be amazing to get to a point where today, if you go to every major African city, not even any major city in the world today, you will find a club, a nightclub that's like an African nightclub. Literally, I've tested it, and sometimes it amazed me. Between an African restaurant and an African nightclub,
Yes.
in almost every major city, you'd find one, which is great. But I will have to bring a full circle, at least in the fashion space.
Yes.
Hopefully, we'll see House of Tayo. Or maybe we'll work together with Afro Quality.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I think one of the because I tried to look at what is feasible, what isn't. Now, one reason I've been drawn to accessories. I was drawn to accessories when I started because that was an easier access point. But I am looking deeply into accessories once again. Now, when you look at clothing, if one really good thing that many brands, I guess the industry as a whole in Europe, in America, in England, that they do is their sizing. So if I'm experiencing a brand I've never experienced before, if you tell me it's a UK 12, it's a UK 42, it's, or it's a EU European sizing, I'm more willing to experience it. I'm more willing to experience because I know what I get. I know what to expect in terms of sizing. Design might not be what I'm looking for, but when you're looking at African fashion, there's always question marks because there's no standardized sizing on the continent. So that's why in-person pop-ups have been very important for me and for House of Tayo, because people need to feel and try on these garments. Those will be the same people who say, "Oh, House of Tayo's medium is like this," when they're telling their friends. But it is so difficult to look at something online, especially clothing, and say, "I know how this will fit." And if some of the shirts are a bit longer, someone can see it in the image, but they're not sure how it will fit or work for them.
One thing you said when we talked about the music, and it got me thinking, is how Africans embraced the music and Africans in the diaspora embraced the music. And I'm wondering what it would take to have a lot more Africans, let's say, embrace the fashion so that we can do with the music, we can do with fashion the same thing we've done with music. What do you think has to change? Is it the mindset that has to change? Is it infrastructure? Is it policy?
Well, policy is an interesting one. I would say first and foremost, you have to create, as a fashion designer, if people are not buying my products, I have to create the occasion for them to wear my products. People have to see clothing in movements. They need to see it in life. So you have to create the context. Some people are, if someone is wearing, standard suit to work every day somewhere in London or, maybe in New York, then they have this shirt that they love. But sometimes, especially if you're not a bold fashionista, whatever, they're waiting for the context to wear it.
Occasion.
Yes. Yeah. They're waiting for the context to wear it. Someone going to invite me to a dinner, whatever. So I think that we also have to create the context for people to wear these items and celebrate them. It's difficult to you for the masses to just adopt this without understanding, where and when I would wear these pieces. Now, when you talk about policy, initially I would say no. However, I love reading about what restaurants and cuisine, because I feel it's closely linked to fashion. Now, when I read about what what Thailand did to make their more to basically, they called it, I think it's like culinary diplomacy of sorts, something along those lines.
I think I've heard.
Yeah. So I wondered, Thai restaurants are quite prominent around the world,
Everywhere.
and I thought that was just immigrants going and setting up these restaurants. I thought that's what happened. But they actually created dishes that could travel around the world. Maybe in some situations they toned down the spice level, and they use those dishes. They created a standard for Thai restaurants, and they insisted on many of the Thai restaurants to have chefs and cooks who were Thai or trained in Thailand. At least when these restaurants are setting
Would
up.
been exported.
Yeah. And that is policy. So and I read this story maybe like a year or two ago. So my whole life before that, I was just enjoying Thai food in different places and thinking, an immigrant came here to do something else, ended up cooking. No. That was
By design.
That was by design. And in those Thai restaurants, you look at the ingredients they're using, the spices that they're using, the flavorings and all those stuff they're using, they're made in Thailand. So you have, whether it's their chilies, their soy sauce or fish sauce, or all these things now have a ready market all over the world because of that intentional policy. So that's why I say policy is a factor, and it became a factor for me just from watching what happened with Thai food globally.
Amazing connection, and I can actually see it that in the fashion space is something that can be also pursued very strongly, because there are certain motifs and certain design elements that are traditionally and authentically African. And even if when they come on the continent, there are certain design elements and design motifs that when you see, you would know this is from Kenya, this is from Zambia, this is from Rwanda, this is from South Sudan, this is from Ghana. Like there are certain things, you see the kente, you know this is from Ghana. You see the imigogo.
Yeah.
You see that, you know this one, Rwanda.
Yeah.
You see, I can't remember the name for the one in South Sudan, but they have all these motifs. And then there's Southern Africa, there's some that you see, so okay, this one definitely it's from Zululand.
Yeah.
So there should be a way to be able to use these ingredients. Maybe the downside or the difficulty with it is that because these are artistic expressions, so it's very easy for somebody to just go and make knockoff versions of it and then go and sell it in Europe and cream the market. But it will be interesting to have some policymakers explore how they can build some sort of a fashion diplomacy strategy for Africa.
Yeah, no, definitely. It starts by looking what our ambassadors wearing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, like it could be as simple as that. What are they wearing? What are they wearing when they go and meet different people? What gifts are they giving? If you think about how many gifts the average ambassador will give throughout a year, what are the gifts that they are giving? Those all provide opportunities, and I think that everyone involved needs to look at the bigger picture, because it might not pay next week, not next month. You can't wake up and just put these things in a microwave and assume we're going to see results immediately. It's built up over time. And with the last thing with the policy that is protection. You've talked about elements that we can distinctively know that they're from different parts of the world. Like if you see how the French protect champagne, they're like, listen, you can call your sparkling wine. I don't care what else you're going to call it.
Just don't use the.
It's not champagne. If it didn't come from this part of our country, it is not champagne. So we have to fight for what is ours.
Or the IP around some of these.
Exactly. Because that's where we start to create value.
The story you were saying about what the ambassadors could do reminds me a couple of years ago, actually not a couple, almost 20 years ago. We had a president in Ghana back in the days when we were growing up,
Yes.
where they instituted on Fridays that everybody should wear African prints.
Yeah.
So it became a thing. We had something called Friday Wear.
Yes.
And you can imagine what it did for the local fashion industry. But along the line, I don't know what happened. It seemed to have died down. But that's maybe if somebody, a historian, goes to evaluate the trend in terms of the consumption patterns of Ghanaians participating or patronizing African brands, that could be an inflection point where the whole market probably went up, and then maybe it came down, but it wouldn't come down back to where it used to be.
Yeah.
So you would see some growth. So if from the policy side there are such interventions, I can see clearly how it can also help a lot in the fashion industry. I wanted to ask a question about how the fashion, African fashion can move beyond clothing to become a cultural movement. But I think our earlier conversation has captured it well between connecting the dots from music and how the influences are and how that movement is going. And then we touched a little bit on the food. But that's an aspect that I know you're not a chef, but from a creative point of view, what collaborations or opportunities exist if we're able to, for instance, export our food, and how can that also help the fashion industry?
I feel that so when I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted House of Tyre to be at the inception, and I thought about experiences that gave me a positive impact of or positive reflection of a different culture, and I was looking at things that were easy access, like music, food. Those are those two. I will even call them arts. Those two arts.
Yeah, perform hooks.
Yes, they're hooks, and I will want to learn more. I will. So it's an entryway. I look at the arts as an entryway, and I knew that what I wanted to achieve can only be done with the arts, because intellectual debate and GDP this, GDP that, even intellectual people get bored of that at some point, But the arts, it's about feeling, It's about like what made you feel in a particular way. I've enjoyed songs where I don't know what they say mean, but the song made me feel a particular way, and so I do feel like when I look at cuisine, when I look at film, when I look at music, these are entry points, and as a African fashion designer, it's also on me to identify and see who has made a breakthrough. How can we work together? Or when someone comes to my pop-up in London or New York, how do we give them a fuller experience?
Authentically African experience.
Maybe they smell London coffee, when music is being played, so that when they smell coffee again, they're going to remember us. I think that there are ways of creating a richer experience for people who come into your space to experience the brand, but also we have to find ways of reaching out to different people and pulling them into our world.
You talked about the conversations around GDP and the hard numbers getting boring at some point, but then there seems to be a disconnect. Do you think African governments take creative industries seriously enough as engines of growth and job creation. Just juxtaposing that with the obsession with all the hard economic numbers when our politicians and economic leaders tend to talk.
I mean, I can't remember what year it was, but South Africa economy was bigger than Nigeria's for a long time. Then there was like one weekend where they just added like Nollywood and a few other industries, and in one weekend, because of the way they counted it or they calculated it, Nigeria surpassed South Africa, and I remember that blowing my mind when I was reading the stories about it. I think that it's important for the data to sort of exist. And there are some decisions that are being made because they're looking at, okay, how many jobs exist in the creative industry right now versus maybe agriculture or versus steel or construction, you know? And if I plucked someone from a vocational school or even just someone off the street, how quickly can they be earning from a particular industry? So I do believe that numbers are important, information is important, and it's a responsibility of many of us within the industry to have as much, I guess, data as possible, because if someone is looking at it from I guess from the helicopter view, exactly, from above, and you're glancing, and our leaders have to make many different decisions, and you're like, okay, we have limited budget, we have different things we need to do, where do we put the money? And as people within the fashion industry, within the arts, we also have to make a case for ourselves. We have to, and then we also have to, I think I remember from one of our early fashion weeks, we were trying to put a collection together, you're trying to organize a fashion week. Then we said, but no, we need like an infographic. And so you're trying to figure out all the nationalities of different people who've come to your show. And then when you put that information in a nice infographic, even us who are in this industry were like, oh, wow, 100 different people came, and then when we started to count not just our employees, but supports, like maybe the guy who does the garden once a week, another person who
provides you buttons, or somebody who
exactly, when someone who does my deliveries, we have the same people that do our deliveries. And I started thinking like this in 2015 when I went to Stockholm, and it was a number of us from different aspects of the different sectors of the creative sector as a whole, and they were telling us what they did. And one of the things that they did was redefine what is the creative industry. So people who are making video games and whatever, to the music industry, and they're selling millions of albums. The video game, I think that time, I went in about 2015, I think Minecraft had sold for like 1.5 billion, Skype had sold, but those are parts of their tech, but they're parts of the creative industry. So at that time, I think it must have been significant. I know it was well over 30% of jobs in Stockholm were from the
connected in the creative space.
And that's why language and communication is so important. Because if we're not doing that, then it looks like
it's an afterthought. Yeah, it's peripheral.
Exactly. So there's so many different important players we need within our industry, and some people to collect data, collect data to explain what is going on the ground.
You said something very interesting that is shaping into the next line of conversation, which is how fashion businesses and creative industries in general collect data and how much value we give to the numbers. Because most of the times people tend to do it for fun or from a passion point of view and forget that at some point the numbers will be called in hard and they need to be able to stand up on their own. There's a lot of evolution in the world of AI, and people have talked about it. From where you sit, how do you see new technologies like AI impact fashion? Maybe you can talk about it first from the point of view of data collection, for instance, and getting the insights that hitherto we did not have to even know the real size of the creative industry.
So I think that we need to find ways to use the new technology in a way that grows our businesses. I think that we also need to be aware about who also built these products, and we have to be, I would say, even cautious, because if you do build, I think what we've seen a lot in in the world politics today is when you are too reliant on a system and then people decide to pull the plug on it, what happens to you?
Yeah.
So those within the tech space, although I try to see how to use AI every day to make our work easier and more seamless and to serve our customers better. But I try to remind myself every time I get excited about a new function or something I did a lot easier, a lot faster, I try to think back, don't get too excited. Because if this one aspect of your business relies on this exclusively, and there's a global blackout for 20 minutes or an hour or a week, what happens? Or when they decide to change the price tenfold, what happens? So I'm optimistic, but I also I remind myself to be.
You are cautiously optimistic.
Exactly.
Okay. I like that. And for me, coming from a technology background, I always talk to people and I told them that it's important to understand what is happening. It is important to be cautious, but there are things that we can, at our levels, also maybe ask in terms of our governments, because some of these platforms are being developed in ecosystems or environments that they don't answer to our local governments.
Exactly.
But then at the point where they have to do monetization, one way or the other, they would have to figure out a way of collecting their money. And that is where you can bring in some kind of control or structure. Because yes, you want technology to fly and you want it to do well, but you also need some guardrails. That's one point. But the other side of it is, I'm maybe an optimist when it comes to this, is the fact that so long as you don't create a situation where you have a unipolar, one powerful entity that runs a lot of the AI systems, but you have a multipolar setup where there's competition, at least you would expect that that would answer for the fear that somebody will wake up one day and increase the price 100-fold or try to shut it down and then try to use it to cripple you and all that. That's really how I look at it. And this from an individual point of view. And if you look at, let's say, today, Microsoft Word, almost majority of the computers in the world run on Microsoft Word. Yeah. It's still a computer, as a technology and a solution that comes from one country and a particular company. But people are dependent on it. But we don't have that fear today of, oh, I can't run my PC on Word because tomorrow they can wake up and increase the price overnight. That's how I interpret these future technologies. From a geopolitical point of view, I can see, for instance, if, let's say, somebody decides that, okay, we don't like the whole of Africa, so then we'll shut them out of Facebook.
Yes.
The same way today you don't have any Google or Facebook in China. Even Russia now is cut out of SWIFT and things like that. So those are the scenarios that become very complicated and very complex. As a small business person, I don't know if that's within my power, but those are the things that, as you said, you want to be cautiously optimistic because those are real possibilities. Yeah. But I like what you said about how you use AI. Maybe the second part of it, outside of the data side, is design. Because really that's the elephant in the room. A lot of the things that we are seeing AI do today, some of them are Marvelous.
Yes.
What do you think? What do you see? How do you see yourself use it to express the craft of House of Tayo going into the future?
It's something that I've been sort of quite cautious with. I think that obviously, like I test things here and there, and I try to make sure that I am even if I get a particular result, I try to sit and marinate and think a lot deeper into it. So if I was to give an example, not too long ago, because I never studied fashion, so I just continuously practice it. And there's some things that felt like intuition, but they're based on knowledge from somewhere else. And in this particular instance, I was looking for the right contrasts for particular color. I was trying to put some accents onto different clothing, but I didn't want the obvious one. So I was like, what, I was actually writing it as a sort of stream of consciousness, and it was good to have responses as I continued to build. Eventually, the answer was I guess, a combination, but it was a process, and I had to go through that process in that way.
Filtering out even the output coming from the air.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I was able to get combinations and accents that were they were based on the color wheel, and like opposites on the color wheel. And so it was built off a rationale that many different, experienced, whether it's interior designers, fashion designers, use, and different color theories. And because I never learned that in school, I was able to learn that, and learn why I was picking up certain combinations. And then when I put the product in the store, customers look at it and like, I don't know why I like this, but it makes sense for me. And it was so interesting. I don't usually spend a lot of time at the store. I'm mostly at our production space. But it was interesting to see how customers interacted with those products.
So with that experience, and this is something that you were able to achieve using technology, do you feel like technology can ever replicate the cultural soul that is embedded in most of the African fashion and African products that we put out there?
At this stage, I know technology moves fast, but at this stage, I don't think so. I think because there's so much context that the technology might not have sort of access to. And so, if for instance a customer walks into my store and says, "Oh, I need something for a funeral," and the AI, their assumption is, "Oh, funerals is just black," but that's not the same in every culture. It's not the same in every context. And there are things that, maybe because I've been serving this person for years, I'll know what they want, And so I think context is always key. And it is important for myself and even the team that I build at the store, is we need to try and pay attention to context.
Yeah. What excites you about the future of creativity on the continent?
I think the thing that excites me the most is that we're just scratching the surface. I don't feel like we're anywhere near the peak. Another thing that excites me is we are beginning to consume a lot more of our products, and we are able to now. I believe that there are many people on the continent building fashion businesses, and maybe the West is an afterthought.
Okay.
You know, I remember when I was starting out, and then people kept asking me, "Oh, what's your what's your autumn winter collection is going to be like?" I'm like, we don't have the same winters, you guys. Yeah, it's maybe at most we have wet and dry
It's
season.
a dry season,
You know,
where I don't
Rob, you know. So now I'm trying to build this whole autumn winter collection, and you know, there are times I was trying to say, okay, what would it look like? And then at the end of the day, I'm like, it's not my context, and I'm selling here primarily. So I think that we're starting to see more brands that are just like, then if the West likes my products, they can come to. We're not going to go and chase fashion weeks around the world. I will go from Cape to Cairo to find my clients, and and the rest of the world will can come find me where I am. I think that's exciting.
Beautiful. If you had to bet on an emerging trend that would define the future of African style in the next 10 years, what will it be?
That is that's very challenging, and something that I continue to think about. But now we'll go back to numbers and data, and the youngest continent in the world. Whatever it is, it's going to be driven by the youth and what the youth want to celebrate, what the youth want to embody. And so, although I think I'm still quite young, I'm looking at the youth culture. I love just, you know, coming here to Zaria Courts and looking at kids playing basketball, watching their style, looking at what they're wearing. I like doing this in many cities around the world, but I'm glad that Kigali is now having more and more centers where you're seeing the youth, and so I don't know what it's going to be, but I do believe that it is going to be driven by the youth.
You've had your work won on global carpets around the world. What does that visibility actually do for the business back on the continent, the bottom line?
This is funny because I had a few experiences over the years that motivated me to focus on the business model and efficiency and production. This was for the first Black Panther. We dressed Junior and Nyong'o, and once that suit went online, that was the first time my phone froze because of Instagram. And we had people from all over the world saying, "How can I get this exact outfit? I will send you money for it now." That fabric had run out. There was like no way we could produce more, even if I wanted to. We had special Black Panther elbow patches. Someone said, "Can I just buy the elbow patches?" And I hadn't even thought that I could sell it as a unit. And people were ready to throw money at us, but we couldn't. We were so focused on creating that outfit. And I said, everyone that I know assumes that now, you know, the money's flowing in. You know, Black Panther is the biggest movie in the world. It's been the biggest movie for some time. That you've made it. And I was sitting there and I was like, my bank account didn't take, because I wasn't prepared. And I kept telling myself, the next time things like these happen, we have to be prepared. And so I started to focus on the business and trying to see how we can grow our team, how we can increase our production, how we could increase our reach. But what it did in the short term was credibility. I had someone who visited the week before, and at that time we were doing traditional like suits. Now we discontinued suits, but at that time we were. and he didn't want to pay what we were asking, and it was nothing, to be honest. We had to underprice just to get people buying our products, and he's like, no. I'll go and I'll get my suit somewhere else. No, the day after the suit went viral, he said, so I'm coming with a deposit tomorrow. And I was like, and he was assuming we were going to just take wait for him. No, his assumption was that he talked like we had agreed on the order, and he's like, at that time we were accepting 50% deposit, came with 70. And then he left it with. So immediately it was credibility. And that credibility was still, it was, I would say, it was more valuable than the money at that point. Because so many people didn't believe that Rwandan fashion could reach those heights. And since then, we've had so many different Rwandan fashion designers reach new heights, and it's happened consistently since then. So it was so important, and that credibility. And now, before that, people, if I had an appointment with someone, they felt that if we said 2 p.m., they could rock up at 4 because you're creative, you're not supposed to have something so important. And it was so frustrating because I'd be sitting there with my notepads and everything, And so that credibility was so important for us. And it was why I was willing to do that suit. We emptied out our account. We were using premium materials. I paid an arm and a leg with the DHL. We stopped all other production, and we had to do that suit in 2.5 days. So I had multiple people working on it. And then each one of those people, you're paying them above and beyond what they would usually get. So we emptied our account, and not to be paid for that, but because the credibility was going to lay the groundwork for what we want to achieve in the future.
Now, looking at this kind of setup where you have a good endorsement, but then from the commercial machinery that exists to drive the business, you underestimated what it could look like. I'm just thinking, because I've heard this from a lot of creatives, so it gives me the sense that we think about the businesses, but we don't think about them in terms of structurally what it takes for it to be like an LVMH or an H&M or something. Is there something missing in the way creatively when we are building businesses we look at things? Why does that happen quite often? And that's not even your experience. I'm sure when you talk to other creatives, they will all keep telling you the same experience. I think about 3-4 months ago, there was another African artisan that was making, I think, shea butter or something, and they got some endorsement from a big media entity somewhere, and they couldn't meet the orders. So I was like, another one. What's missing in the value chain for us as African creators?
I think it's because where many of us are building for the audience we can see.
Okay.
Whereas the internet, social media has made the world a lot bigger. And it's so easy to go from 0 to 100, but it is dangerous when you don't have the infrastructure or the setup, because you will sign almost any deal to try and fulfill that demand. And a lot of times it might not be the right deal. So I think, the way I'm building House of Tayo is one eye on our immediate audience and the one we can see and we understand. But then what would happen if we had scale up significantly? What would it look like? So it starts with the ideation of like, what would it look like? And the times I'll sit and just daydream and try to think, maybe when I'm going on a run, I think, what would it look like? I think that's the starting point. Then you start to explore. And that's why it's important for me to now, I transitioned from, if I'm looking at where I source my products. Previously, I'm looking at Kigali Kigali is small market of people who buy my products. So I have to make sure there's variety all the time. So I'm buying small batches, like maybe 30 meters, 40 meters of a particular fabric, so that we make a couple of shirts and then you don't find them again. But when you're trying to go beyond borders, that 40 meters has to transition to 200, to 250, to, eventually to 1,000. So every year I push myself. I'm like, okay, our button supplier, what is their capacity? Can we start doing samples with another button supplier who can reach a bigger capacity? My fabric suppliers are like, okay, what is the lead time for you to make more fabric for me? Can you make the exact grade? And so I start by looking at the raw materials. Then from the raw materials, I'm looking at production, and I'm still looking for the right production partners to be able to significantly ramp up our production. Then from that point, I'll look at retail, and not just retail. I mean, I've had more conversations regarding retail, so I have a general idea of the people who that I could work well with, and that's part of the reason we're having this conversation, because we were on the same wavelength for these sort of discussions. But we can't skip the product, I don't want to have just one shirt in every store and say I have a footprint. I don't.
What you're saying, and maybe this is an opportunity to make a plug for Afro Quality in the podcast. And one of the core motivations for wanting to build Afro Quality has been what you just said in terms of the journey, that we have a lot of instances where African creatives or people making things, because of your reality today, so you produce for that context. But if we don't have any machinery or any setup that prepares you to be able to produce en masse, then tomorrow when the day in the sun comes, it's like moving from 0 to 100. And that one, there's nobody, even if you are, I don't know, Superman, to be able to meet that demand. But then in an environment where we've created a machinery that allows an artisan to get comfortable with the idea of, okay, now I can produce, I used to produce 100, but now I'm producing 200, 300 because I'm distributing instead of 2 countries, I'm distributing in 20 countries in Africa. I'm not a global brand yet, but my products are in 20 countries because there's a distribution infrastructure that I depend on. I don't have to worry about that. What that does is that when that moment comes, that Wakanda moment comes again for a House of Tayo, and you have to move from your production that you have that is supplying 20 countries to meeting demand that is coming from around the world. It is not a huge jump, because the way, like when you're working out or you're playing sport, muscle memory.
Exactly.
When you've been doing something and you've been doing it continuously, you already know the levers to pull, who to call and all that.
Exactly.
And that becomes a lot easier. So from a multiplier level, imagine having a system in place that allows a House of Tayo, a Sonia Mugabo, a Flove, or an Aflimba to all be able to achieve that. That's really the thinking and the mindset around building a business like Afro Quality. Other than that, everything will just be a dream. The policy will come, the trade rules will come and everything. But when the time comes, our makers do not have the training ground and the capacity to be able to scale up.
Exactly.
So yeah, that was my pitch for
definitely. I agree with you, and that's why, these conversations. I think one thing that I should also mention is relationships. The relationships don't go from 0 to 100. They're built over time, and that's when you will. It's always fascinating when I hear about relationships that happened or occurred for bigger fashion brands around the world, and I think one other aspect that I should mention is many designers in Africa. We are designers. We do production, retailers. We do all part of the chain, but in reality, the biggest brands around the world don't do all those things, and it's time for us to, as different players in the system start to emerge, strategic partnerships will allow everyone to grow bigger.
Great. So, in terms of I'm still on this idea of like looking at the Afro-Tayo business. I say Afro-Tayo. Sounds like a JV for the future. Looking at the House of Tayo brand and globalization and scaling, how do you balance something deeply rooted in Rwanda while appealing to international audiences? Like in your mind frame and when you are storyboarding for your concepts, how do you think through such a scenario?
I think that sometimes you can create one product and then just put it in different contexts, and it's embraced in different ways. So sometimes you can create a singular product, but maybe the way you portray it, you show different, different spaces, societies, or different events. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is sort of trying to understand why different people purchase our products. And in Rwanda, many people who buy our shirts, they like it as an alternative to a suit. They're just like, climate, whatever. I just also don't feel comfortable wearing suits all the time. But the shirt and maybe pants give me a formal look. People from other parts of the world will come and see that and say, you know what, I want to try the same. And I feel that there are different ways of doing it. Sometimes it's color combinations as like an introduction. So you have, if I were to design a shirt for someone who has many formal events and they live in either Europe, UK, the States, maybe you start them off with a navy blue, start them off with a black, a gray, then you start to transition them to maybe a dark green, burgundy, and eventually they have the full spectrum. But I think it's so important for us to stay true to an identity and an aesthetic. We shouldn't, rather than trying to change our products to fit another market in terms of design, we have to also identify similarities and the context in another country that would allow for our product
to fit in. Do you have a playbook for expanding House of Tayo to other African countries, other parts of the world in your mind when you see the vision for House of Tayo?
I don't have a definite playbook. I learn every time I have a new experience, but I think the most important thing for me, entering a new market, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the West, is by physically getting the products there for people to experience. It might be a short-term pop-up. It might be a more established retail partnership. And so that is key, to see if your products even work in that space. But aside from that, I know I'm probably not going to set up a House of Tayo shop in many of these cities. So it's about finding the right partnerships that will allow us to take our products into these different spaces with with minimal burden. There are people who are taking on the risk to break into new markets. There are people who have better market understanding and sort of will create that cushion for us when we try to take steps into new markets.
Matthew, as we get to wrap up on this conversation, I want us to touch a little bit around your views about your work so far, impact, and legacy. But since you are big on stories, so maybe let me put this question in. You've worked and employed a number of people, artisans from the very beginning. What's one story of impact that stays with you in your 14-year journey?
It's difficult to pick one story in particular, but one thing that I love to see is progress. I love to see progress from my team and their personal progress. So, you know, the guys who joined the team who had like one pair of shoes, you know, and and you they were grateful to come to work just because we had lunch, yeah, and now they have families, they have mopeds or shoes, but they have a motorbike, stuff like that. So it's exciting for me to come to work every day, and I'm seeing progress from their personal progress, because it's showing that our work has impact, and it's I've taken a personal interest in you know are you kids going to school, and I feel like I go a bit beyond the HR now, and
Becomes like family.
yeah, it comes like family. There's some I have some staff members, they came talk to me and said, listen, my wife doesn't have a job. And the first time I'm just like, oh, I don't know, should I be hiring couples? Yeah. And and I was just like, the fact that they decided to have this conversation with me, let's see. And it also feels like a big responsibility to know a household depends on our success every day. But I think the most exciting thing for me day to day is also to see the progress of my team. And if they've achieved certain things one year, I'm like, what is it going to look like next year? And they must also have ambition for themselves, and to create an environment where we all collectively want to do better.
On feeling the sense of responsibility, do you at any point in time feel like, from a cultural representation point of view, you have the whole of you have on your shoulders the need to represent Rwanda culturally when it comes to the creative space and the fashion space to the rest of the world?
I think that those ideas and thoughts, they continue to develop in different ways. I feel that what is representing Rwanda, and I think of, if creatively I said we only need to do Rwandan inspired design alone, I think that's limited. I think we need to look at I enjoy looking at Africa as a whole, but I think that representing Rwanda also includes doing well as a brand from Rwanda. And whenever there is success that has been born from here, that is representing Rwanda well. So there are times when I've had people come to the store and say, no, I want something that looks more Rwandan. I want every shirt should have Imigonga. And I was like, no, that's first of all, Rwandan design is not just Imigongo. And then beyond that, we have to understand that Rwandan design can be shaped by experiences here, by being here while you're creating. And some of these things evolve over time. They're not going to be frozen in time from you get a design that will existed at one particular time and say the shirts will always look like this. We have to continue evolving.
Let's say a young man walks up to you, he's inspired by everything that you're doing, and he says that, what does it take? What does it really take to get to the level that you are now? I know in your heart you want to go somewhere else, but there will definitely be people who would look at where you are and see that as a milestone that they would want to achieve. And they ask you, what does it really take? To be brutally honest in the response to that young person, what would you say?
I'd say a couple of things. Self-belief, a strong sense of self, knowing try and know yourself. What makes you tick? What excites you? What disappoints you? What upsets you? What do you think might make you special? You have to have that strong sense of self, because you now create the conditions that allow for you to do good work. Another practical thing that I would say is important is you have to create a buffer for yourself to be fully creative. You have to create a buffer for yourself to dream. And when you look at artists who've existed in the world, fashion designers, or even athletes, sometimes it's their family, it's their friends, it's their partner who has been that buffer that sort of gave them the protection to dream. And that's why it was so important for me to start when I was in school, because I knew I was still staying at my parents' house when I started, and I knew that if I went too far out of that period, I would have had another career path, to be honest. And so I identified the buffer that already existed, and I had to capitalize in that time frame. I had to show some level of success in that time frame. So creating a buffer for you to be ambitious, to dream, to be creative is so important. And then lastly, discipline. If it's something that you want, you have to be ready to sacrifice a number of things and give it a good go.
Wow. So let's say today, Matthew Rugamba is 98 years old. You are enjoying your life somewhere, retiring, standing in front of a mirror, and then you're looking back on your life. If you imagine yourself at that age, what's one thought you think will be on your mind?
Try to live a life with minimal regret. But I do think at a certain point, at a different point, I try to take stock.
Okay.
And so if I was 98 years old thinking about my life, I will think, did I live my life authentically? And authenticity is important to me. And there's some things that work out, there's some things that don't work out, but I will think, even when I look back at decisions I've made, about things I've said in the past, like that whole comment about the tribal
African tribal.
Yeah, the people using tribal to describe African fashion. I looked back even now and say, yes, I was authentically myself, and my shared my opinion. No, and I think when I look back my whole life, I will think about the decisions I made, the thoughts I had, the things I said, were they all, authentic? And I will be at peace if I'm 51% authentic, approach life authentically.
That was Matthew Rugamba, founder and CEO. Well, he doesn't call himself CEO, creative director of House of Tayo. It's been an amazing conversation, a lot of amazing insights and nuggets. And for me, my biggest takeout from all this is staying committed to it and believing in yourself for the long haul. It's been interesting, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is Rooted in Quality by Afro Quality. We'll catch you again next time. Thank you.